Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No Never. I am your host, Hanani Abraham, and I am so excited to share with you an awesome discussion that I had today with Sam Marion. Never had a chance to speak to him, and specifically the topic that we've been talking about today has been autism, what it is, how to work with it, how to deal with it within the school system, how to deal with it with parents at home, self-care, something called neurodiversity. This was such an awesome topic that has not been given the attention that I think it needs, especially here on this podcast. And I think there are so many different things and different areas that we could explore. And I honestly didn't get through about half my questions that I had of them until we ran out of time. And I think when we deal with autistic behaviors, whether it's in the school system, at home, as a parent, there are so many specific questions. And I encourage all of you to give some feedback. And if you have more questions, Sam was more than happy to have a follow-up if need be. So if you have questions that you would like answered on this topic of autism, please reach out to us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. And I look forward to any feedback or questions or comments you might have that you want to give to us. Remember to please like and subscribe, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. So, Sam, there are so many different areas where I think we can start when we talk about this topic of autism and where it's something that parents can know more about. Let's really start at the beginning of the year. Can you give us a description of what autism is and how it manifests itself within a child?
So autism, I describe it, it's a different way of being. It's a different way for the brain to work, a different way that the nervous system interacts with the world, different way of processing things. From diagnostic criteria, we're talking about differences in communication, differences in nonverbal communication and things like that. They can lead to relationship challenges, which these are different criteria, but they're connected, right? If you have challenges with communication, relationally, challenges show up. We see sensory differences. As much as we talk about sensory stuff in today's world, there's sensory-friendly clothing lines all over the place. It only shows up in autism, kind of in this neurodivergent space. But that is one. Repetitive behaviors, playing with things the same way, actions being the same, repeating things. Sometimes it's anywhere from just somebody who kind of actually just sort of restates the same words over and over to I've worked with a kid who tells the exact same joke every time he goes to a restaurant. That's what he does. Things like that. These patterns that they kind of get dug in a little bit, but we can also frame this in a positive sense that where we can just see, somebody who may feel more comfortable when things are more predictable. That's helpful. Right. From a diagnostic perspective, there is level 1, 2, or 3. People have kind of viewed that as high functioning, low functioning, and it's not. We view the autism spectrum as a color spectrum of a lot of different traits. They can get plotted all over the place. So the level 1 is lower support needs, and level 3 is higher support needs. It's that kind of a spectrum. But we acknowledge that people's support needs may vary situation to situation. In a school setting, a person may have higher support needs because it's so overstimulating and can be a little bit confusing versus, in a home environment where they know exactly what to expect, lower support needs, kind of vary, something like that.
Okay, so there are so many things you said there that I think are awesome and really important. Two things that stood out to me that we can maybe go into a little bit more over here. So you said the words neurodivergent. Can you explain to us here what that means?
Yes. So neurodivergence, it's this idea that some people's brains work outside of, you'll hear the word neurotypical brains. I prefer to use the neuronormative. I don't think there's any one way that brains function. I think there may be sort of more common kind of neurological processes, but I think more often than not, we have these, it's more of an expectation. But this is where I can kind of get dug in a little bit as a clinician, and I can sort of nerd out on what exists out there. Every assessment tool is normed off of somebody. And so I will use word neuronormative as a contrast because so many assessment tools are normed off a certain group that may not project across all society. So neurodivergent is being outside of that normative expectation, normative culture. It's really broad. There are people who would say, well, neurodivergence is ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities. And there are people who would give a neurodivergent umbrella that is the entire diagnostic and statistical manual, that any difference is okay. This just differences. And I see arguments for both sides of that. Commonly, we may even put like giftedness in the neurodivergent umbrella. If you've ever worked with gifted kids, or if any listeners are raising kids who are identified gifted, they know these kids think a little differently. And so it's not always like a necessarily what we might view as a negative. It's just a difference.
Okay. So neurodivergence sake is a way to like classify certain things within what a child is experiencing. Is that a fair way to say it?
That, and sometimes it's a much more comfortable space where we can shy away from labels. I don't love labels, but you got to give this like space, like, yeah, you know what? This child, they're clearly, their brain is processing a little bit differently. They problem solve a little bit differently, and that's okay. And that also gives space to maybe offer supports without trying to like nail down exactly what's happening. We can say, you know what, yeah, we'll support these differences, and that's okay.
Got it. Okay. So you also mentioned the word spectrum or spectrum disorder. And could you just elaborate a little bit on what it means and what the spectrum actually like entails and how it manifests itself like differently in every type of individual?
Yeah. So if we just jump back a little bit, previously we had Asperger's syndrome and autistic disorder. DSM-5 came out in 2013, and there were advocates who were pushing for this for a while, but at that point it became codified that we no longer had autistic disorder and Asperger's syndrome. Instead, we had autism spectrum disorder. And when that first came out, and I was in private practice not long after that, nobody quite knew what that meant. It took us a while to figure it out some. And it almost felt like diagnosing could get really sloppy because clinicians who are diagnosing could say, oh yeah, somewhere on the spectrum. But what does that even mean? And what we find from hearing lived experience of autistic adults, and I am autistic, so this is my lived experience as well. It's a cluster of traits. There are so many different traits in the human experience, and then even more so in the autistic experience, that we look at that spectrum, like I said, as a color spectrum where it's almost like everybody is their own constellation of little plot points on that spectrum, as opposed to a linear high-low spectrum that people tend to think of. But if we think about, if you ask my high school math teacher, was I high or low functioning? And then you ask my high school English teacher, was I high or low functioning? They would give different answers. Right. And so even that, like, it doesn't track to say a person is consistently one or the other on a binary or linear spectrum, as much as we have a cluster of traits in the human experience, and we look at it as that kind of a spectrum.
Yeah, I 100%. And I think when it comes to having a diagnosis, which itself can bring about so much family trauma, let's call it, in a certain way, and we're going to get to that. But I just want to back up over here. Just we talk about this concept of, I think in general, a lot of parents struggle with how to distinguish between what is considered like typical developmental challenges and signs of autism and whatever it would be considered on the spectrum. So I'm curious to hear from someone that has been diagnosed with autism, and this is what you do professionally. What would you tell parents that are just looking for guidance regarding, is this normal? Obviously, whatever that means. And is this something, that we should be just letting be? Should we be paying more attention to it? Like, how do you go about dealing with that, whether it's in your office or what you would be telling parents based on your own experiences?
I encourage parents to do research, and that doesn't mean that they have to dive into, medical books. I think social media is a phenomenal place where you can actually get pretty good information and see what resonates. Most parents that I work with, they are spending time in some social media space. So I'm not sending them into some new area, right? And listen, find some creators, and I can point people towards that, some creators who are neurodivergent, who share their experience. What resonates as you look at your child, especially, are you seeing a role model that may fit this child? This young person. And that, I think, we start to see that positive spin. Society continues to see a deficit, right? There still is a bias against so often, but I think it's a lack of understanding. When we start to understand, what this full spectrum can look like, and, that starts to shift things. And then we can see, well, if this person's experience is similar and resonates for my child's experience, then are there other elements? Are there other parts of the spectrum? Are there other traits that we may see as well? And are there support needs? And that's what I think the most beautiful language about autism in the DSM. As a clinician, I've never been a huge fan of the diagnostic manual, but I love the idea of support needs, because I think all humans we all have them, and every relationship that I have would be better if everybody understood my support needs and I understood theirs, not necessarily as an autistic person, but just all humans. Every, married couple that I've ever known, as they understand each other's support needs, the relationship is a little better, right? So if we can identify support needs that a child has, then that gives us action steps. And so might I pursue more information if this is going to help my child and I'm seeing directly how it might, then it feels a little bit different for a lot of parents to follow that process. And, I always tag this on there, depending on where you are, especially, but a brief interaction with maybe a pediatrician may not be sufficient. If you're like, no, they said, let's just keep watching. And you're a parent who's got this gut feeling. It's like, I think there's more going on. Then I would encourage that parent to keep doing the follow-ups and even ask for a referral. Even, if the pediatrician's going, I'm not sure. If the parent sees it, then the parent sees it.
Yeah, I think parents are the best professionals and diagnosticians when it comes to things, and I encourage parents all the time to go with their gut. But I want to go back to something that you were just saying, that social media can be a benefit, which I do agree with, and also I also say approach with caution. So I'm curious, when you say there are a few people that you would recommend, do you mind sharing them? And obviously we're going to post their actual links if we can, or at least their names we'll post in the show notes. But where can people look online to get more information when it comes to finding information about autism and how to treat it or deal with it and work with it within the family dynamics?
So I'll start with myself. I post pretty regularly different content. So at Sam Marion Counseling, I've got a good friend who her content is very much geared towards parents, educating parents about autism, and that's Dr. Taylor Day, the.dr.tay. I believe the.tay is her Instagram handle. The Speech Dude, it's just at Speech Dude, like Chris Winger, and he's got, I think, really engaging content from a little bit different perspective. So far, I've named a social worker, a psychologist, and a speech language pathologist. These are all sort of different, just in terms of people sharing their lived experience. I think a fascinating person who does a lot of research, Chris Bonello, his content is autistic, not weird. And he himself does research, self-funded as far as I can tell. He's an author, and he shares a lot of it by his lived experience as an autistic adult and as an educator. And so these are kind of gives you different angles, and that can, because the way algorithms work, if you add a few people, the algorithms will start to feed you a few more.
Got it. Yeah, and it is usually the way they work. And I think you're being pretty eclectic, and where people can find information. It's not just a specific linear way of looking at it. Like, well, let's look at social workers or therapists, and I think when you get that lay of the land, it does help to sort of gain a perspective. And I think to echo your words, Sam, is that for people to realize is that there is no one direction. There is no one answer. And it's about finding information, finding what's out there, and gather it all in and see what works for you, see what works for your child. And there is no, set way of going about it. And there is a reason why, even let's say, according to the DSM, there might be a criteria of, let's say, 4 out of 6 that need to be met in order to be diagnosed with it. Your child may be 3 out of 6, but that doesn't mean they can't be worked with because they only have 3 out of 6. And I think that's important for parents to know, is that it's not just about the diagnosis of what your child is going through, but it's about what you're feeling and how your child is developing, and to be curious with it, and to ask and to research and to do things, and trust yourself and trust your gut. And I think that's a really good point. I'm so happy that you brought it up that way. And to keeping in this topic of going with the gut, so to speak. So obviously, autism comes from somewhere in a certain way, and I'm curious if you could talk about what the causes of autism are, and specifically regarding the understanding, or you could say the interplay between the genetic, environmental, and developmental factors in autism, and what parents can know regarding the origins of what happened or what's happening to their child. Can you talk about that for a minute or two?
A little bit, yeah. We're very much in a place of, I think, evolution of understanding of autism right now. And the research is there. And so, and meaning the research is in, and I think early stages of good understanding. It seems to be that there's a heavy genetic component.
Okay.
I have a lot of families I work with where the parents start to recognize, wait, these traits, I have these traits. And sometimes what happens is you'll have a parent who's go, my kid can't be autistic because they're just like me. Then the parents realize, later, like, oh, they are autistic because they're just like me. So a heavy genetic component, there's questions about how much environmental. We do know, like the big vaccine thing that got pushed out a couple decades ago, that was completely fabricated. Vaccines don't cause autism. You'll still hear that bounced around, but like the guy who created that retracted it, acknowledging that he made it up. Even though that still gets circulated some, it's maybe some environmental, but again, I think we're such an early place of research because for a long time, the focus was even on like curing autism, which it's a different way of being. And there's, I think the genetic component does show up in I read an article, as a research article that was maybe 20 years old that, looking at some correlations that if a child has a grandfather that was an engineer, that increased that child's chances of being autistic. It's going because like somebody who had a career in like math and patterns and stuff like that and science may have had an inclination themselves, may have been autistic. I think he sort of points to that genetic thing, but that's where there has been weird research over time like that. Like that's a grandfather who was an engineer, which by the way, I have a grandfather who was an engineer. So it holds true for me, but half my family is engineers at this point, actually. But yeah, so it's emerging.
Okay.
And I think we'll know more over time.
And I think in the field, when you think about how long humans have been around and the field, whether it's just autism or psychology or how we diagnose is less than 100 years old, to be able to have, or maybe around 100 years old. So, it's brand new in a certain way, and we're still looking for a lot more information. And, if anyone listening to this wants to chime into this conversation, to please, comment and talk about, what you're seeing regarding the different ways of, and where the autism spectrum and where it's coming from and developmentally or environmentally. Any notes or anything anyone wants to post, please do so. This is a conversation, and this is something that we talk about here on this podcast, that it's about understanding that you're not alone in what you're going through, and different parents are going through different things in different ways. And just because you went through it doesn't mean your child is going through it the same way, because they're growing up in a different generation. So even if it's like, no, he can have autism because this is what I'm experiencing. Well, maybe there were certain things that you had in your life that allowed you to function on a certain level that your child might need a little more assistance with. That being said, let's talk about schools. And I think one of the things that we talk about, our education system has things that we need to work on here in America. And I think there's also a lot of positive that we could look at regarding the things that kids are able to get in school. When we talk specifically about having specific diagnoses, and specifically, let's talk about autism, there's a certain, I think, level of communication that needs to be between the parents and the school. And I'm curious if you could give a little guidance regarding the role of the parent in dealing with the school, and maybe certain language or certain things that parents should be saying that can help the child be, well, let's just say thrive in the best way possible within our education system. And let's start specifically with the younger grades and maybe working the way up. Maybe there are different things that are necessary. So what are some of those things that parents should, the language used when they're talking to school and having talks with principal and teachers?
I always formulate these kind of processes or this thought process around what are the sources of dysregulation for this child? And then how do we accommodate the nervous system around that? And so the communication piece, if a child is easily confused because sometimes they just don't quite understand directions, then having an accommodation place where this child is allowed to ask maybe more clarification questions than other children might would ask. And there may be a balance where once everybody starts their assignment, then the teacher takes a moment to make sure this child understands, or they can kind of come up to the desk. This doesn't have to be like asking in front of the whole class. I look at things like schedules. A lot of autistic folks really thrive when we know what to expect, what's coming next. And letting a kid have the day's schedule within the classroom taped onto their desk is a common and super easy accommodation. trying to limit things that are unpredictable or, that feel unpredictable to the child. And so if the teacher is going to be absent, let the child know in advance that the teacher is going to be out. If that's sometimes it's planned. I've seen it where there's a fire drill that's going to be happening and this child knows in advance. And maybe they've got sound sensitivities. So they've got, noise canceling headphones and they get like a reminder right before it to go and have those on in advance, as opposed to scramble to put it on when that loud alarm's going off. Again, just the sources of dysregulation, whatever this child struggles with, and what are kind of directly accommodating that, which is not diagnosis specific at all, right? This could be a lot of different challenges a person faces, but we're supporting that challenge, that difficulty. And usually these are small things that can be done, as opposed to when people go into schools and ask for like just all the accommodations when most of them don't even fit the kid anyways.
Is there certain language that parents should be using, or certain words, or certain ways of, this is what we're doing, this is how you can help us, and parents taking the reign? Is there certain things that parents can say in those conversations?
Yeah, I think explaining the why, right? When I talk about the regulation, like this, and if the school's not quite familiar with that language, right? This is very therapist language. We talk about regulation, but this helps the child stay calm and more engaged, and frequently. And this is challenging because schools vary so much on how supportive and the approaches that they take. So many schools are still based around kind of slowly getting outdated, like behavioral interventions that are about training somebody as opposed to supporting somebody. And so when we start aiming towards, say, I want to be neurodiversity affirming, you can use that kind of language. An affirming approach. Want to support, and this is, when I go back to the whole spectrum idea, the idea of high function, low function that people use implies high function implies not much challenge. But if we use the clinical language of support needs, then we're saying, and here are their support needs. This is what helps this child remain calm, feel settled. And feeling settled for this child means engaging in their schoolwork. This means sitting still, not panicking and running out of the classroom. So these are some things that, if it's a surprise substitute teacher and the child won't walk into the class because that's not what they were expecting, the child knowing in advance, this helps the child be able to walk into class, things like that. And so I think that gets parents and schools on the same page a little bit more of like, this is the outcome. This is how it's going to work better in the classroom as well. And yes, we do this at home. This is helpful. And the more collaborative, the better.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. That's for sure. Something that all parents strive for, hopefully, to have that collaborative approach. At the same time, we can have this argument probably, but the way, my point of view, the way I sort of look at it is probably more important than the educational system running well for a child is their social interactions, and especially as they get older. And they're not going to be in the same school system. They're not going to be in the same system. They're going to go through different systems. And I'm curious, are there things that parents can do, and maybe they can even ask regarding from the therapeutic point of view as well, of how to work on the concept of social interactions, so that when they're in their store, when they're waiting by the bus, when they're getting on an airplane, or they're starting a new college or high school, maybe even from athletic programs, how can we make sure that I guess there's enough awareness or things that parents can do or can be worked on with their child from a social interactive perspective when it comes to dealing with a child that can fall under that spectrum that we're talking about regarding autism?
Yeah, so there's differences, and everybody has different social needs, right? Let's sort of name that. I had parents who called me once and they said, we're worried about our kid because he comes home from school and he goes to his room and plays an instrument for a couple hours. And we didn't do that when we were his age. You go, well, does he report any challenges socially? Or is it he's just, after a day of having to force interaction, he wants a break? Oh, no, he does this other stuff. Like, okay, so he's just different than you, mom and dad, right? Like, let's acknowledge just differences, as an adolescent, that's okay. And, for like trying to help young people develop social relationships, with neurodivergent kids, this is ADHD, autistic kids, I guide parents towards, instead of trying to push them towards connecting with a person, help your child figure out what they enjoy doing and let them do that alongside other people, and let that be the source of kind of developing social interactions. Because if you say, hey, we met this other person in this online support group, we're going to get you together, you can go to the park with their kid, y'all can play, and their kids are just like, what? I don't know what you want me to do with them. But if you realize both kids have a special interest, which is common in autism, have special interests, and if we just go stereotypical, it's a common one. You both love Lego, so we got y'all together to build some Lego, and let the kids get together. That a lot of schools have like a Lego team or Lego club, or what are the activities in school that align with what this person loves already, and get young people in those environments doing what they love, and let them build out some social interaction. One, probably people who are similar to them in mindset, but also in a space that feels a little more comfortable. They're doing something that they want to do. Forcing them out of the swim team, so their social is maybe not going to go as well. And then I think we work over time on helping these kids understand, this is children, adolescents, this is adults, understand their own differences and how other people may perceive them and how they may perceive people, and let them make a choice on how they may interact a little bit. At a bus stop, you don't necessarily have to chat with everybody else. If it's a school bus stop and these are kids in your class and they live next door and they say good morning to you, you might say good morning in response, that kind of thing. If it's the bus stop on a city bus line, you may not chat with everybody, but we try to explain some of these differences over time, but maybe not without the expectation of like, well, you have to do it this certain way. Instead, it's like, let's just know if you choose not to do that, here's the responses you may get from others. If you don't say good morning to your neighbor, they may not want to play in the yard with you that afternoon. They may be connected.
I was trying to find over here as you're giving the answer. I know there was some research done with Lego, specifically when it came to autism. So I think the researcher's name was Dan Legoff, actually. How apropos is that?
Sure.
I think the concept of doing something, building something, you might even some people might use the word distracting in a certain way, just to sort of help them have their focus onto something. And just because you, the parent, might think that, well, this is what I did, this is what helped me, so this is what my child should do. No, we want to be able to parent the child for what they need, and not child to parent for what we think they need. And I think that's very, very important. And when we're dealing with a situation where, that child might need just a little bit more of our time when it comes to parenting, as opposed to one of our other children, just to keep that in mind, and to be mindful of the fact that what is it that they need. And like you were just saying, that sometimes there might be a situation where they'll find common interest, great, and sometimes they won't, and that's okay too. So it doesn't mean that we have to find something, but let's see what's the best situation for our child. And when we use the acronym we talk about over here a lot is ABC, the moment. Always be curious, and just be curious about what's happening. And when your kid's in grade school, it might look very different for what they like doing when they're going to be in middle school or high school and beyond. And just something to sort of keep in mind over here. That being said, this is a lot of work for a parent. So I'm curious, when you have these conversations about children with the parents and stuff, well, how do you go about the conversation from the parents' point of view regarding what they can do for themselves? Obviously, we talk about having a proper balance and being mindful and doing certain things for yourself that are important. Is there something different or special that you talk about with parents of a autistic child that they can do for themselves to make sure that they stay level-headed, cool, and calm and collected?
I get a lot of calls from new people, new clients, and the parents say something to the effect of, my child's in burnout. We're struggling over here. And I always say, I have never met the parents of a child who's in burnout where at least one, if not both parents, were themselves burned out, just from all the things and trying to figure it out and try to force things that's just not working. And so sometimes I say, you know what, it's okay to give yourself a break. People debate about how much screen time is the right amount of screen time. Screen time should never be used as a babysitter. Well, you know what? If screen time gives you a chance to go to the bathroom without being interrupted for 3 minutes, then I'm okay with it. Be careful what's on the screen, right? That's sort of a, monitors. That's a whole other conversation. But as a parent, if you get home if you're a working parent and you go from work to pick your kid up from the after school program, and you get home, you've all been gone for the last 9 or 10 hours, and you just need a minute for yourself to settle back into home. And so your kid gets TV time and you're like, but I'm supposed to be doing homework or this other parenting stuff. But if you need that break so then you can show up, okay, go for it. Looking for, I think support groups can be helpful online. There's some wonderful ones. I think the more local that they are, sometimes the better, right? So that you can have social connections. You can learn from people who maybe they're navigating the school system. If you're here in Georgia where I am, and you join a national group and that's really active of people who are in New York and California, well, schools are different. And so you may have a hard time applying it, but if you join a more local group, you may connect with people. I know of people who've, now they've got moms and dads groups that sort of, they've developed out of some of these small online communities. The moms watch the kids while the dads get together and have a little bit of a break, or, things like that, or kind of different partners take turns. These things can be powerful, but you just got to acknowledge your own needs. You can't do everything, right? No matter what your child's needs are, you can't do everything. And, I've never seen any research that says the parent needs to be perfect. I've seen a lot of research that says the parents need to be good enough.
Right. Beautiful. Very, very well said. I love that quote. And that's what I was going to say. There is no such thing as perfect parenting. No. And keep that in mind. And it's not about you're going to mess up, but you're not going to be perfect. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I happen to love just that example you were just saying regarding if you need to give your kid your tablet for 2 minutes so you can go to the bathroom in peace. And for right now, until bedtime, that's going to be the only piece you're going to get for the next 4 hours of the home rush hour version of things. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. That being said, I know when it comes to autism, there's a more emphasis recently on technology and it being a part of whether it's the treatment plan or progress or things that need to be done. And I'm curious from what you've seen therapeutically, what role do you see technology having when it comes to the future of, or maybe the present in autism therapy? And are there any tools or specific apps that you would recommend for parents?
So I don't do any of this work, but I've seen pretty big advances around AAC, and I can never remember the full acronym there, as a communication device for people who are non-speaking or have limited communication, where there are great apps. And so people that use an iPad almost to exclusively, or a different kind of tablet to communicate, and that can be really powerful, right? But like that's a little different than talking about it for screens and things like that, in terms of like games or shows. So I think communication, it can be really powerful. And there's the emerging research shows where it used to be like, no, we should not give people these supports, these aids, because then they won't speak. And the research now is showing much more towards, no, we should give people all the support, and that does not actually limit somebody's development of any other communication skills. And if anything, it furthers it. But so if we get into the space, so like that's sort of one element over here. We get into spaces of like, well, it can be a great distraction, right? Getting home from school, needing a break. Maybe you just needed to disappear into a different world for a little while after living in the school world. And, I point a lot, I talk a lot about high autonomy parenting. There's stuff out there, especially with a subset of autism called PDA, that people will use language like low demands and try to drop all demands. And I say, well, the world has demands. I'm sitting in an office where I have to pay rent. Like there are demands on me. And so I've tried to balance it with what I call high autonomy. So if we think about gaming on a tablet or a different system, some games give you very little autonomy because they have a storyline. You have to follow it. And that's not flexible at all. Or you're online gaming. I heard this example recently from a kid who was talking about how difficult it was playing Fortnite. They got killed, and everybody has their own perspective on that. But this kind of example came up. And then they watched somebody pick up all their stuff, and they were just powerless over that. And I've never played the game.
Not the first time this has been talked about on the podcast. So yeah, we know exactly what you're talking about.
And so like how upsetting that was. Now let's contrast that to Minecraft, which I've never played this either. But on creative mode of Minecraft, you can do anything. You can build a treehouse, you can build a castle. And I had this demonstrated, this last part. I had a kid bring in his iPad to show me what all he loved to do. You can bake a potato and cook a steak on Minecraft. And I didn't know that until a couple months ago. I had a kid show me. So you can literally do anything. Like that's a high autonomy opportunity to balance out times that have been really frustrating and really difficult for somebody. Now, here's the big challenge. Part of autism for one of the traits is this fixed interest, and it can be really difficult to transition. So many autistic people have a hard time transitioning from this activity to something else. And I think with screens, those are some of the hardest transitions because they're so designed to hold our brain there. No matter what your brain, how your brain's wired, these things are designed to hold you there. So transitioning away becomes the difficult piece. And sort of make an assumption of the generation of most listeners. When we grew up, if you were going to have a little screen time, you watch TV and then the show ended. And it was probably a different show or, and there was this end point. But streaming shows, there's not an end point. It just goes to the next one and things like that. So there's not a natural
That's a good point.
transition that I assume our parents could lean on some. I used to get home from school as a kid and we would watch like 30 minutes of Saved by the Bell. And then it went on to something else on TV. There wasn't like, but I want to watch another one. No, I'll watch another one tomorrow. The show, TV moved on. And that was probably my own mom's time to like transition from being home. And, but today's world, there's not a natural transition from screens. And that's the big thing that gets really difficult. I think more than anything else is when things are not going well or we have to transition away. So that's each family finding the solution that works for them, not only on the screen, but then how to get back off of the screen.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And knowing that there is transition stages before and after, and be prepared to be mindful for there being a little bit of a tantrum, and it's a part of it. But the more you can have a transition, the easier it can be. Or whether it's giving them a countdown of like, hey, 2 minutes, we're going to shut it off, Tommy. 1 minute, we're going to shut it off. That sort of helps where it's sort of going. I saw some parents I know have reported even having the device on a internet timer, which after a certain amount of time, you let them know the internet's going to go if you're not going to have connection in 2 minutes from now, and then it just happening because it's now something that's been transitioned into like, oh, there's nothing we can do about it now. So it's not like I give you more time. The internet's not working right now, so that's not something that that we could do. That could be something that could be beneficial as well. As there's so many things, Sam. You've told me so much over here, and I hope people have been able to pick up a lot. One really important question over here as we sort of wrap up the interview over here is when you were just saying the word transitions made me think of actual transitions in life. And as a person is leaving the school system, which sometimes can be pretty structured just based on the fact that there's a time for everything, and they might be going to a place of whether it's work, whether it's college, who could be a little more flexible in their timing at the beginning, and they're moving to other places in life. And even for adults, as they're going through different stages in life, sometimes things are not as structured and they have to make their own structure. And I'm curious how you talk about that in your office regarding the concept of transitions and transitioning from childhood into adulthood, or obviously with teenage years in between there as well. But going through those transitions can be just as difficult as a transition from tablet to no tablet, and maybe even more harder to deal with than just a tablet. So I'm curious how you sort of talk about that and how you develop a plan in a way where people are able to have a knowing, healthy way of transitioning into different stages in life. How do you work with that?
A big thing is to try to have it so that the transitions are not so rigid from you were doing this way and now it's a different way. Instead, have it be as smooth as possible. And so if we think just education system for a second, in all the way through high school, a student can qualify potentially for an IEP, individualized education program, and 504, or a 504 plan. Right. And these are distinct, IEPs under IDEA. This is, overseen by Department of Education. 504 falls under the Rehab Act. This is ADA type stuff. This is overseen by Office of Civil Rights, if we just talk sort of the federal agencies. But IDEA ends at the end of high school. And so, and part of an IEP meeting, and there's a list of people that have to be in there for it to be an official IEP meeting, or people to sign saying they're okay with them not being there, is a parent. You go to college, that's gone away. And now the child or the young person at this point has to self-advocate. And so when this transition goes well, even middle school and throughout high school, the young person is more and more involved in those meetings, and they're guided more and more into self-advocating, so that when they get to college, they're prepared for that. That's not a new thing to explain to somebody what their needs are in an academic setting, right? So we try to transition like that. It's a little bit. Anytime we're going to go somewhere new, go check out the place. Do your research about it, right? This is transitioning from home to a vacation spot. What can you learn about it before you go to the amusement park? Is there, what can you learn? Is there a sensory room somewhere at that place. If you're going to be in an airport, where's the sensory room? There probably is one now. Maybe only one. It may be like at some weird place, and some, but you can do your research about that in advance. If you're going to be going to college, the young person is go visit and think through what are the needs that a person has. Maybe a big school is not ideal, but a bigger school may have more accommodations in place. There are schools that have programs within them that are there to support autistic learners. So things like that. I think it's about research in advance. It's exposure in advance, so the person can know as much as possible about what to expect. It may be we're almost like role playing, changing classes at college a time or two to kind of learn the route while there's nobody there on a Sunday morning or something when they can feel calm, so they're more prepared to handle the crowd. Work, settings can be similar, kind of knowing what to expect. And again, always being aware, what are the things that are most dysregulating for a person? When you got this child, you're kind of teaching them, but by, adolescence, we want them to start learning what are some of their own activators that they can support around.
So I think it comes down to there's the DBT concept, the dialectical behavioral therapy concept that we call cope ahead and prepare as much as possible. And I think that's really what you're saying. And in the same way parents can do that, it sounds like, when you have adults or young adults or teenagers that are trying to have the most autonomy regarding their scheduling and their independence in general, is to teach them that skill of coping ahead and preparing for things, whether it's walking them through the classroom and campuses or preparing for a job and going there before it has started. So all the routes regarding the travel, whether it's by bus, train, or plane or whatever, or car, obviously. So it just preparing things as much as possible. And that's something that really doesn't change. And I think that's really important. And obviously, I think the biggest thing that I'm taking out from our amazing conversation and such an insightful conversation is to prepare as much as you can and realize it's not going to be perfect. And the more we're able to prepare, ask those questions, whether it's, of the child, of our spouse regarding what they need, or even situations regarding the school. How can you help us? And this is what we're thinking. And just creating that collaborative approach, I think is really important. As we sort of finish up over here, there are so many different things that we touched. I still have a ton more questions that I did not get a chance to ask, but I'm trying to be conscious of the time over here. I'm curious if there are like maybe one or two points, either from what we talked about, just to sort of summarize, or maybe something we didn't talk about that is really important as we sort of wrap up this conversation that I didn't ask about.
I think the main thing for people to keep in mind is everything we're talking about here to support an autistic person, but this is kind of for everybody. We want to support someone's nervous system's regulation, right? We want to help people, if from supporting a child, I want to find ways to help them to feel in their calmest state. And that's not autistic or not, it's for all children. But if we just view it, so autism, it brings forward, or it brings with it just different things that might activate a nervous system to get them into more of an elevated state. And we just learn these differences and support around that. And the more we can view it through that with this individual, honestly, there's a lot of little things that people do that go a long way to help this young person, that it's nowhere near as much effort as they've been putting in trying to do all the things, even if those things didn't matter as much. So I think just getting specific and understanding how to support this person and kind of having their nervous system calm and regulated.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's constantly changing over here. Thank you so much again, Sam, for everything that, that you've taught us today. I'm curious, before we do the rapid fire questions, as we finish up over here, where can people find more of you or they wanted to reach out to you?
The best place on Instagram at Sam Marion Counseling. I'm pretty active there, and any other link that I have, you can find it there.
Amazing. Okay. And we will try to post that in the show notes over here. So as we wrap up over here, I'm curious if you could share with us, Sam, what was the worst advice you ever received?
Try harder.
Sometimes it's not about harder, it's just about smarter in a certain way. Okay. Is there any place other than the social media that you've mentioned that people can get more information, or a book that you would recommend, or maybe YouTube, or a certain person to follow that they can listen to a podcast from? Who would you recommend, or what would you recommend people try to look at for the information that we've been talking about today?
For overview kind of information, there's a book called Divergent Mind by Janine Nuremberg. It's geared a little more towards kind of the female experience, kind of being late identified, but just as an adult processing through some of this stuff, it has a lot of good insight, and it's not clinical language. So that's and it's not a real thick book. That's a really good read. A lot of people have enjoyed. And if people want to don't want to go deep on the information, but want to try to connect to it in a little bit deeper way, I actually wrote a book. It's a guided journal. It's called Embracing All Brains, and it's geared a little bit more towards educators, but it flies. It works for anybody. It's just most examples come out of the classroom. That's available on Amazon. That I've had people give me the feedback of going, hey, I bought this because I'm an educator, but this is just good, and passed it around a little bit. So those are two things that I think could be helpful.
That's awesome. So my last question for you over here is, if you could think of an everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have, whether it's for home life or for being a therapist, what would that be?
A mundane superpower? Because my superpower answer is always that I would like to be able to teleport so that I could just, go to France, have lunch in Paris, or just not have to do the travel part. But I can't even conceptualize a mundane superpower. Always having clean clothes, probably something with cleaning. It would be my mundane superpower. Just sort of
that makes a lot of sense.
Mary Poppins style, just like clean it up real quick.
That sounds amazing. Sort of like put it in and take it out, and it's all clean. I don't have to worry about anything else. Yeah, that's right. Something I would love to. Sam, thank you so much for today. This has been really, really informative.
Thank you for having me.